Hello, everyone. My name is Lasha Tsatava. I am one of the co-founders of Saperica, nonprofit organization, and our mission is to promote Saperavi and other Georgian grape varieties, along with Georgian gastronomy and culture in Finger Lakes, New York, and around US. By organizing and facilitating educational seminars and exchange programs between the regions for wine and culinary industry professionals and enthusiasts. And my colleague and co-founder of Saperica will introduce the next initiative, which is the Saperavi Festival that will be held in Finger Lakes, New York. Erika, please.
Thank you, Lasha. My name is Erika Frey. I am also a co-founder of Saperica, and we're pleased to announce that we have our first event, the first annual Saperavi Festival, taking place on the grounds of Dr. Constantine Frank Winery in the Finger Lakes on Saturday, May 14th. And to kick off this initiative in the run-up to this event, we have created a series of seminars.
And we're excited to announce that keynote speaker of the festival will be Lado Uzunashvili, an international winemaker with PhD in Oenology. And I need to share with you his impressive resume. Lado is also has partaken in research projects with a faculty of Oenology at the Montpellier University in France. He has helped a research work at the Australian Wine Research Institute and now designing a research work with the Agriculture University of Tokyo. Lado has a very strong understanding of scientific aspects for wine production and style design, and the ability to adapt winemaking techniques to required wine styles. His unique skill set includes working and understanding vinification methods to produce award-winning wines from international grape varieties like Chardonnay, Viognier, Sauvignon Blanc, Verdeo, Semillon, Chenin Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Pinot Noir, Syrah, and Grenache, as well as native indigenous Georgian grape varieties, just to name a few: Saperavi, Katsiteli, and Tsoane. He has excellent knowledge of viticulture techniques to make wine on vine under various climate conditions, including pruning and canopy management techniques. Lado is an expert in setting up ancient cellar and in vinification methods using the 8,000-year-old techniques in subterranean clay pots, Quevri, which was recognized by UNESCO as intangible cultural heritage to humanity. And Lado's roots come from the family of vintners and vignerons of 11 generations and over the span of more than 250 years. He has been practicing winemaking from a very young age and experiencing different practices, climate conditions, grape varieties, styles of wines, and philosophies around the world, particularly in Georgia, Australia, France, Ukraine, and Morocco. He has an impressive and extensive working experience, most notably as a winemaker with Hugh Hamilton Wines and Patriti Wines in McLaren Vale, South Australia, as a chief winemaker and director at Chateau Mukhrani, Georgia Wines and Spirits Company, of Pernod Ricard and Mukado Wines, his own brand from Georgia. As a consultant winemaker, he has helped Le Domaine Paul Mas, Le Domaine de Vignier, Castel Group, and La Domaine de Lalande in France, as well as Shaba Wines in Ukraine. Lado is a member of a tasting panel and a judge at Concours Mondial de Bruxelles and Worldwide Wine Competition. My apologies if I butchered the title here. And he's also a member of American Wine Society and Beverage Trading Network. Very impressive resume. And we would like to give you a little preview of the Saperavi seminar series. Today, we will be discussing the history of winemaking, and we also will feature another seminar about Saperavi viticulture and winemaking. And then on the day of the festival, Lado will present importance of Saperavi in the global warming climate. And then after the festival, we will add one more seminar about microbiology and ecosystems. And we now give the opportunity to Lado to share with us his amazing knowledge. Please, Lado.
Thank you, Lasha. Thank you, Erika. It's actually lots of pressure on me now to properly introduce this gigantic history of wine and, of course, my country, Georgia. Let's move to the next slide. As we say, Georgia accounts for approximately 8,000 vintages. What does that mean is that viticulture was born, obviously, after the permafrost, after deglaciation of the area, which we will see later on the slides. Now, to say where Georgia is, I mean, presentation is done by Mikado Wines, myself, and thanks to Lasha and Erika, it just got much richer. And I think Erika and Lasha will make it very richer during this recording, this presentation. Now, the Republic of Georgia, most of people in the world make a mistake by associating Georgia only to the state of the United States. Georgia is a country, an old country between the two seas, which is Black Sea and Caspian Sea in Trans-Caucasian region. This region is on everybody's lips due to the current political crisis. You may know in Ukraine, we are the neighboring country there across the sea. This is our flag, and this is how we write what we say. Actually, I have to mention that the logo of Saperica is one of the greatest logos I've ever come across, and it is a proof to our knowledge, empirical knowledge, that Georgian alphabet was created with the great love to grapes, and the Saperica logo is conveying that idea perfectly. Thank you for that, Lasha. Thank you for that, Erika.
Thank you.
Just a little bit of demographics about the country. Country is about 70,000 square kilometers. 22% is occupied by Russia now. I have to say this to remind the world that this region is a hot place. What's going on here on our side, and with ideally 5 million people, out of which 1.5 million is outside of the country due to the crisis at the moment. We are neighboring with, four different countries: Russia from the north, east from Azerbaijan, south Armenia, and southwest Turkey. And our the most important neighbor, as we say, to access the rest of the world is Black Sea, of course. We are a Black Sea country, reaching the world by sea trade routes. Now, the climate of Georgia and the diversity of ecosystems of Georgia is dictated, of course, by its rigid terrain. We are blocked from northern Russian cold by Caucasus, but not we are not blocked by Russia. I mean, by Caucasus from Russian politics. Unfortunately, mountains cannot help us in that case. From the south, we have Lesser Caucasus, Minor, Caucasus Minor, or Anti-Caucasus. There are few names, and in the center we have this dividing range, Lihi range, which may divide the country into two regions: the west and the east Georgia. The rigid terrain of Georgia, of course, as I said, creates perfect conditions to have microclimatic areas in both west and east Georgia. Eastern Georgia wine region are slightly warmer and drier, while the western Georgia climate conditions are more humid. And I would not say cooler. Cooler means that even winter is cool, but here we mean just the summer is cooler, just to precise it. This is 42nd parallel, which is the birthplace of its vinifera. We claim that Georgia is the birthplace of its vinifera, which spread out from this country, and this is how Georgia sits on this parallel. The political map shows our surrounding: Russia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey, and Black Sea, obviously.
And but Lado, we always hear about the history and culture and how ancient Georgian wine culture is. But what's interesting is why and how did that happen, and why Georgia for this ancient history of winemaking? How did that happen?
Well, why? I think to explain why, we need to really look into history and the way how the actually, sorry for my voice. I'm sometimes losing my voice, but to come back, and how the climate started changing as soon as deglaciation started. We are in a climatic pocket, which is, as I said, protected with Greater Caucasus from the northern cold and stabilizing factors of two seas on both sides and warm impact from the south. So this climatic pocket played a huge role after deglaciation to form a perfect set of conditions, I would say, to not only viticulture, but in general agriculture, and we will see it later on. I have these two pictures, how climatic phase one looked in Georgia 8,000 years before present, and then when climate stabilizes even more, 6,700 years before present, and you see how glaciers retreat and give us more land to cultivate. Previously thought Fertile Crescent went up to Georgia, and we now have, Transcaucasian region in general, I would say, including, of course, a bigger part of Georgia. When we say Fertile Crescent went up into Caucasus, that means that agriculture can be claimed that it started in this region. And these are recent discoveries. These discoveries are telling us that agriculture may be even older than in Mesopotamia or Phoenicia, in previously thought area of Fertile Crescent, which is, I would say, not only me, but science world says that it's a birthplace of modern civilization in many senses. These two guys, Zia and Zezwa, were found in Georgia, and they date 1.7, 1.8 million years. Forgive me for my poor knowledge of anthropology. They are humanoids, which then were recognized that people migrating from Africa settled in Caucasus, and then this is where they went to Europe. So these two guys are thought as transitional kind of genome or whatever to modern European race. These are the articles what we have as a proof to early Neolithic period when wine was born in South Caucasus. That's of course well after those two guys. That's after deglaciation, latest deglaciation. And these are the institutions researching and broadcasting about this phenomenon. The phenomenon is like this, that once glaciers started retreating, of course, people started coming out of caves, and they found themselves in a perfect condition when they could have a different perspective on their livelihood. Instead of only hunting and gathering, they came to the point to create sustainable, say so in modern technology, food production. So people from hunting and gathering are finding ways to produce their own food, thus achieving settled style of life. That meant that these people have to be somehow chained or bound to the areas of their living, because if you harvest your food, you have to first cultivate the soil and then seed the seedlings and then harvest your food. In its turn, harvesting the food generating another phenomenon, which is logistics. So they could distribute their food throughout the year to feed themselves and of course to nourish future generations. That in its turn helps these people to somehow bring about their own culture of tolerance, culture of sharing, culture of taking care of each other. So humans, I would say, are becoming more humans in their way of thinking, and mentality is forming differently. And later on, for the history, this later on means almost nothing, or immediately, viticulture is also born. With the birth of viticulture, of course, wine was made. It was not done overnight in one day. Of course, it apparently took some time. And bringing wine into the society also helps humans to become more human-minded society, because it in its turn brings religion, rights, hospitality, maybe even superficial some beliefs, rituals, and even better way of sharing food, socializing, as we say today. Obviously, there was something to link wine to some cultural aspects, and this is the time when it was born, first time in the human history. Now, after that, obviously, Vitis was liked a lot by neighboring cultures as well, as the time was like evolving into, or society was evolving into more progressive socium. People started exchanging their knowledge, and these are the pathways of Vitis vinifera traveling throughout the world, and these are great names of the world science society, which are supporting this idea. I highlighted one name, Patrick McGowan, in red bold letters, because he's the one behind the latest discoveries, what was really happening in Georgia, which we are going to see later in the slides. And I really love this map, which was created well before we had, I would say, carbon dating or genetic research or anthropological research. I mean, the way we do it today. And this map is totally proving what was happening historically to Vitis vinifera. You can see Transcaucasian region as the birthplace, and from there Vitis vinifera was spreading throughout Mediterranean cultures. I should say that the Romans were the biggest, I would say, influencers to spread viticulture throughout Mediterranean basin and cultures around Mediterranean region. And Romans were the ones behind this diversity of European varieties, grape varieties, because the way they moved Vitis vinifera away and away from its origins, the more they found, I would say, opportunities to cross-select Vitis vinifera with the local varieties, although wild, but still existing varieties, because we know that wine has been on the planet for the last 30 million years, and 30 million years are much longer than just period after deglaciation, which is 11,700 years, and for viticulture about 10,000, or agriculture 10,500 years. So the further the Vitis vinifera species went from their original place, the more they changed their genetics, and somehow people in science world now, they are discussing this phenomenon, why European varieties are so different to the original ones. Are they truly coming from Transcaucasus? But this is absolutely natural to any existing living thing on the planet. When you go away from your origins for so long, over such a long time, then you come across similar genomes, and of course you deliver something different that can happen to even humans. And we see that every day the cultures mix, and we are globalizing our society. Same to Vitis vinifera. Obviously, out of these 10,500 years, many years were dedicated to propagating species which would become more adaptable, more viable to these conditions. If, say, our January mean temperature in Georgia is, say, 12 to 15 degrees, Egypt must have been much different, and Spain must have been much different. So adaptability was the key to settle these varieties under these conditions, thus achieving local specifics for local viticulture, and then subsequently generating local styles of wines. And this is absolutely normal. I think now back to you.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Erika, I think especially in the last 5-10 years, as we have heard more often about Georgia as a country in United States, and less kind of mixing up with the state of Georgia. And there are certain events that have happened or led towards the popularity and acknowledgement of Georgia. So please tell us more about it.
Yeah, so as Lasha said, there are definitely some recent events that have helped to basically recognize this rich, long history that Georgia has had in viticulture and winemaking. So really just in the past decade, we have some significant events such as in 2013, where UNESCO recognized the ancient Georgian traditional Qvevri winemaking method on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. This is, the Qvevri is the clay vessels that the Georgians have traditionally used for wine fermentation and maturation, and they are typically buried into the ground. So we will hear more about Qvevri later on in this presentation and also in subsequent presentations, but this was a very important recognition for this style of winemaking. In 2014, the Georgian government and the National Wine Agency of Georgia launched a multidisciplinary collaborative research project to study Georgian grapes and wine culture. So they actually put some strength and knowledge and money into studying, the significant history of Georgian grapes and the culture. And we're going to be seeing a lot more reports from that effort in the near future. 2017 was a very significant discovery. This was a finding that was led by Dr. Patrick McGovern, who we had mentioned before, and his team, where they discovered really one of the earliest so far evidence of wine on a pottery shard found in Georgia, just outside the capital of Tbilisi. And this was published in 2017 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science of the United States of America, as the study Early Neolithic Wine of Georgia and the South Caucasus. This led to a Guinness Book of World Records. So now, currently, Georgia can claim that it has the oldest wine. So this evidence of wine dates back to about 6,000 years before the Common Era, which matches up with the time of the Neolithic period, and was obtained from the residue of ancient pottery shards that were excavated from the archaeological sites of Garishvili Gora and Chulaveris Gora, which is just outside of Tbilisi. And Lado will talk a little bit more about those discoveries in a moment. Also in 2017, La Cité du Vin was opened in the city of Bordeaux. This is a wonderful museum and center that is devoted to wine and the history of wine and wine culture throughout the world. And in the initial opening, they recognized Georgia as certainly one of the birthplaces and heritages of wine, and it was in their opening exhibit, Georgia, the Cradle of Viticulture. And here is a shot from that opening exhibit in the Cité du Vin. And these are all, I would say these are vessels, right? Lado, you had
these are drinking vessels. You know,
yeah.
we do have huge fantasy how to drink wine endlessly. Drinking sometimes, you know, takes hours and hours, and obviously the rituals mentioned before, which were brought together with wine culture, also generated rituals of drinking, and the institution of toasts or toast making, and this is one of the most beautiful, I would say, proofs to what we are saying now, how people perceive wine in their cultures. Wine was kind of a way of associating themselves to the realm of gods, if you say, and we will see it later on how wine connects, you know, two different periods of Georgian culture.
Great. Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Lado. I think those events are very important in the contribution and recognition of Georgia worldwide. And we will touch base in the winemaking section about this, but I would like to briefly mention also that in 2020, OIV, which is International Organization of Wine and Wine, has added to their definition under special wines, the 8th category, white wine with maceration. And
full skin contact, yes.
Yes, and that also has helped the recognition of the Georgian amber wine category, but we will dive into it later on in the next seminar. Next subtopic, if we could, Lado, walk us through archaeology and the evidence of Neolithic wine in Georgia. We talked about this Ice Age formation of grapes. So how did we come and what evidence do we have of the Neolithic wine and in Georgia, in that territory that is modern?
I will do my best, as I'm of course not specializing in archaeology or the related researches. I have to thank the director of our National Museum, Mr. David Lorkipanidze, who is the one behind organizing all these events and then the researches, and I thank him for this knowledge. The conversations with him gave me a lot, so I will try to give you as much as I remember from him.
Thank you.
These are the sites 50 kilometers away from capital city of Georgia, Tbilisi, and these are the findings. You can see the valley on the second picture from the left in the upper corner, and these valleys have always been regarded as the most fertile and old in agricultural appearance of Georgian history. Luckily, we found this quarry, which is on the left upper corner photo. That is the one which contained the pips and tartaric acid from vinified juice. We are not talking about fermented beverages. We are not claiming, this site is not claiming to be the oldest in fermented beverages, because we know that China is about 1,000 years old, and we know some other findings when fermented beverages existed. We say that this is the oldest evidence when Vitis vinifera grapes were turned into wine in a cultural way, what we call winemaking. This is the oldest finding, which tells us that cultural winemaking was born in this area, unless, of course, we always say we find something older somewhere else. Today, this is the oldest one on the planet. This is the proof that wine was made in a clay jar this way. Actually, you just mentioned that OIV registered this way of vinification for skin contact. You can imagine that in those days, people would not have these physical means to separate juice from skins, and there was no refrigeration, there was no understanding of reductive winemaking. It's against the oxidative way of winemaking, so it was just turning the juice into some kind of beverage, which would then they called wine, grape wine, and this is the oldest proof. Of course, just to reiterate, this region is not claiming grapes or vines as such. As we said, vines existed on the planet for the last 30 million years, But luckily for this area, Vitis vinifera apparently transformed, or something transformed into Vitis vinifera to create this base, to lay the foundation for the modern world wine industry, which is really, really based on these species Vitis vinifera. Though we also mentioned that by traveling away from the place of its origin, Vitis vinifera, of course, was transforming and, enriching itself or changing itself with other genetic influences. I'm sorry if I'm not that precise in terminology related to this particular field of science. These are the sites, and we can see how people are diligently working on that. Many institutions from around the world have been involved in these excavations. Scientists from Germany, from France, from Italy, United States, and most notably lately from Toronto, Canada. Mr. Stephen Batiuk, that is the findings he's done, and this is what was analyzed in Pennsylvania later on. And this international research is really giving such a big strength to this project to prove and to jointly bring out this information to those who are interested in the history of wine, and this history is really magnificent. And humanity is now really trying to somehow put this picture together, and Georgia is, I think, the place where this picture is coming together really, so perfectly. Previously, I thought I'm going to use my cursor, mouse cursor here, if you can see here, Haji Firuz Tepe. That is Zagros Mountains in Iran. Before Shulaveri findings, Haji Firuz Tepe was considered the oldest viticulture and winemaking area in Iran. So that predates any major religions of today, and that's 5,000 years BC, before Christ, before Common Era. But Shulaveri dated origins of wine even older, 1,000 years older. So we now know that wine made in cultural way dates, say, 6,000 years BC. Obviously, there were some, there is a biological cycle in nature. So everything has its transformation into something else. But again, I would like to reiterate that this is the way when wine was made in a, say so, technological way. So people designed the vessel for it. People harvested grapes. People brought the grapes to this place where this vessel was buried or kept. They crushed it. Crushed the grapes, let the juice ferment, and then they enjoy it later on. So this is the first signs of cultural winemaking, and this is Shulaveri mountain. And this great friend of ours, Patrick McGovern, is an American scientist, and he's the one who analyzed all these remains of vinified pips and tartaric acid, proving that juice was transformed into wine in a cultural way.
Great, fantastic. And we also know that throughout Georgian history, we have lots of artifacts that we see throughout the culture, throughout the history, that kind of point towards the continuous history and evidence of our ancient wine culture. Because at the end of the day, there are other nations that claim being ancient cultures, but what does set apart and what points in Georgian history that we are ancient culture and we have continuous uninterrupted winemaking history?
I think the proof that UNESCO recognizes quarry winemaking as intangible cultural heritage of humanity is one of the greatest proofs to what you say, Lasha. Unless this culture was recognized, unbroken tradition, unbroken way of living, the UNESCO would not register. The research which preceded this registration was huge, really. I mean, years and years of studying households, Georgian households, the way of life Georgians led, throughout these historical periods. Why I'm saying historical periods? Because these periods are really diverse. They are very different to each other. Two major periods, I would say, is pre-Christian and Christian period of Georgia, and we see on these pictures, I mean, endless numbers of artifacts which come out of the soil, of Georgian soil, and you can see something really incredible rituals, as say the picture in the center, the nobilities which passed away and were kind of going from this world to the other world, were buried in quarry. Apparently, the upper part of quarry collapsed under the weight of soil through this weathering is also seeable. Can be seen quite clearly on this picture. Not only he was buried in this vessel where they expressed their respect to the person, but also he was given an extra jug of wine to travel from this world to the other world in a good mood, say so. And he is buried in the shape as we are in our mom's womb before we are born. Can you see the signification? How big this culture was in the mind of people of those times. And the other picture, great picture, is just below that. Guy is kind of surrounding quarry from outside. One is inside, the other one is from outside. So both are telling us that life here in this dimension and then passing to the other dimension was kind of a has a link in between, which is always a wine in our mind, in Georgian wines. And actually, even today, maybe I'm a little bit old-fashioned if we say that we do everything with wine. Children are born, we celebrated this phenomenon with wine. Birthdays are, of course, with wine. Our sorrows are with wine. Weddings are with wine. These vessels on the right side, they are the proof how wine was consumed in different shapes of drinking vessels. Now, that is the previous. This slide shows Georgia pagan, which is pre-Christian, or say so, polytheistic, multi-god pantheon of Georgia. But the second, this following slide shows Christian Georgia. And you see how wine immediately appears in the carvings, stone carvings, or churches and palaces and architecture. Wherever you go and see ancient, old Christian architecture in Georgia, you immediately see some connection, some signification of grapes and wines, which is directly linked to God. And I have to single out now these pictures to show you what I mean. Say 12 zodiacs, you can see these 12 houses, celestial houses, which collect energy into the sun, which is always giving us energy for life, and granting us, big energy to continue living on this beautiful planet. And then the energy of sun comes down to grape bunches, which means that energy flow for Georgians were like from outer space into the sun and then into wine. This is how they apparently re-energize themselves, recharge themselves. And this is the first cross made in Georgia. This is the cross by which our Illuminatrix Saint Nina christened the country. Christianing of Georgia took part by means of in the 3rd century by means of cross of vine cuttings. Allow me to give you a brief history behind it. 2 apostles, Andrew and Simon, arrived into Georgia after Christ's crucifixion, but Georgians did not even pay attention. I mean, as a nation, did not even get any impression of their preachings. Only after 317 years, when Saint Nina comes into the country with 2 branches intertwined with her own hair into a cross and showing to the population and King Miriam and Queen Nana that this is the religion which is the next to the for the country. Then they realized that that this is the religion, this is the culture which they have to adopt. So we think that the cross made of wine was a key to turn the minds, this very conservative mind of Georgians by then, to turn the key and make them understand that they have to change something in their culture. And since then, of course, wine and Christianity, winemaking were undividable, throughout our culture. And you can see these depictions of symbols, I would say. The tree of life, you are the vine, I'm the vine, you are the branches, for example. It's quite an old expression in our culture. These are, say, dissected buds on our carvings. How these people would know that life comes out in this shape from the buds? Please don't ask me, because I'm not the one to respond, but this is the fact that today we dissect buds and see how healthy they are, and we can even predict the next year crop. But possibly the signification of dissecting and showing dissected buds on stone carvings were something different. Maybe this is just the birth of life for them. But again, it is associated with grapes, and between dissected buds, there is you can see stone carvings of small clusters of bunches of grapes. And yeah, of course, we fought to preserve this culture today. And uniquely, the only cultural phenomenon that connects pre to Christian Georgia is the only culture, which is wine culture. Wine culture is a matter of national identity for Georgians, and it's even under governmental programs today. And this is how we promote our country, that we are a wine culture. We've been, of course, cut off the world for many, many years behind this iron curtain. And this is the time when we are coming out and saying loudly that here we are, guys, please pay attention to us. This is a very old country. This country has such a lovely history, and this is the country which gave something to the humanity, which is so influential for, I would say, dominant part of population on the planet. And the thing which connects people's hearts and minds today, this is wine. So wine is so old from Georgia.
And I just want to echo what Lado said and bring up 2 points. In the 4th century, when Saint Nino comes into Georgia and with the cross, with the vines, just the moment of that significance that Georgians had to see the cross through the vine to believe into the significance of Christianity. That's like an extraordinary moment in a history of Georgia. At the same time, when at that moment we had 6,000 years of history already of making wine. It's just fascinating.
And one more comment which I came up. You can blame me for this correctness or incorrectness. You can imagine people living in their culture for 6,000 years, how strong that culture would have been. And people adapting something new, which they didn't know. So I would say wine is the religion above the both religions before Christ and Christian religion, because only wine remains the same. So how strong wine culture would have been to abandon your old way of living for the sake of continuity of wine culture, and you are adapting something new, but again through your wine culture. So it's like two bases of Georgian culture, and on top, wine is always seen on top of these two different parts of Georgian culture. So this is something really, I don't even know how to put it into words which would explain this phenomenon, but up here and up here, or down here, I think it's the only connecting point we can find is wine. Wine is everything in this country, and if you see Georgia and you see households of Georgia, you would not notice any single case where people would not have a vine tree growing, even in cities, in multi-story apartment houses. You can see the vines growing up to 5th, 6th story of the building, and it's just as decoration, just as signification of belongingness to this culture.
Certainly, one of the things that I find important about Georgia is that wine culture, which is really strong. I think in some ways, we can talk about the history and the methods of winemaking, but the culture is sometimes almost more important as for me as an educator, to teach people that this culture, uninterrupted, still exists today. And so that brings us to what now sets Georgia apart as a winemaking region, country. What has all of that history and time with this continuous winemaking history? What is that? What is now the result of that in Georgia today?
Well, I think if we touch upon a few things, I think we will see what are the results of this history. Let us go through these statements that oldest wine producing country, which vinifera, comes from this area. We have 8,000 years of history. Then recognized as first culture, first region for cultured and cultivated grape wine. This is no surprise today to anybody that linguists in London, in the UK, they say that the word vino comes from Georgian vino, because of hard sounding part of the word was lost to the history, and people opted to rather retain vino. And of course, ancient traditions and national identity. And then again, the proof to it. And we go and say that we had 1,400 different grape varieties, indigenous varieties. And I always say, and not only me, I think you are of the same opinion. People never learn from the history. We lost more than half to these historic cultural clashes in the region, but we still retained it as national identity. So we are now down to 525 indigenous varieties in Georgia, out of which about 60 are cultivated. The rest is like a good genetic pool to future selection of, whereas the climate changing, I think we will touch upon this subject as well. Climate is giving us huge surprises, and Georgia is one of the best places to really dig into its history and into its with its genetic makeup, and maybe we will study these changes throughout our history, how Vitis vinifera adapted itself, in this area, and how it survived up to today without any cross kind of selections in different regions. So the purity is here, how this pure genome survived. That is very important for us to look into the future and to help future wine industry, or the future of the wine industry, to survive these changing climate conditions. What it teaches us also is that nothing under the sun is so new. And in following seminars, I think we already spoken about it, we will show how winemaking techniques were evolving throughout the history of wine, and what we have as similarities in, say, simplistic way of their implementation and more complex technical way of today. And again, we can show that wine can be made in a more natural way for those who are adhering to this way of winemaking, with no second thought in our mind. We should not be afraid to go back to the roots, and this Georgia is a proof to that. This is a great question, actually, what we have as a result. As a result, we have the greatest proof in the world wine industry. This unchanged, unbroken tradition of vinification, quality, has not even changed in a tiny bit. It will remain the same throughout these 80 centuries, 8,000 years, how many generations. I always say either Georgians lacked the fantasy to develop something new, or this this technique was so perfect they have not touched it, and they kept it unchanged, which to me is a great idea, to keep such an old, whatever it is, tradition to these days, and show people that something really old can so perfectly survive and give something so new to this new world, although it's so old, because Georgia is so new in spite of the fact that it's so old. And this is I think a cycle of life, so to see through wine, and remember what we were yesterday and what we are today. Just while we are seeing this slide, these are the leading varieties of Georgia. Please do not try to remember them, because sounds are really horrific for English speakers to pronounce, unless you are guided and trained for them. I think the time will come to help those who desire memorize these names. Of course, we have a vast amount of different white species and vast amount of different red species in all regions of Georgia. And we will touch upon these subjects later in following seminars. Now, quality tradition, I think we already mentioned and touched upon this phenomenon. Of course, this was the base to the decision. This was the impulse to the decision to recognize this culture as intangible cultural heritage of humankind. And these are the vessels. You can see some are from 3rd millennium BC, some are 7th century BC, some are 4th and again 8th century. Anno Domini or Common Era. And you can see the way of making queries as well. So this tradition is living. It's living, and thankfully, the world has seen it, and it's going to survive. And it's going to live much longer. Why Georgian wine is so special? Well, I think first of all, because of its history and the way we see it through our emotions and culture. As we said, the energy comes down from space into the sun, and the sun shares its energy to grow our grapes. And then we, of course, have this great time of harvesting grapes, and then we harvest them and bring them into our cellars. Cellar was consisted of crush pits and fermenting vessels historically in Georgia. This is a stone crush pits, and these stone crush pits were attributed always to bigger households where people were much stronger economically or by their influence in those times. They could build such big cellars. In other cases, in smaller households, of course, these crush pits were wooden. They would have taken huge wooden logs and they carve it from inside and make a open vessel to put clusters or bunches of grapes in it, and then dance and do these ritual dances, which these the grapes are, and these guys are doing, and then they dejuice the grapes, and the juice go into underground forests and gets fermented. And there was an institution of a winemaker, enologist, if you like, merguine, out of the word ruino, merguine, which is the guy who handles the entire process. Actually, in the 11th century, believe this or not, in the 11th century, in Ikalto Academy in the Eastern Georgia, was a faculty of winemaking where they taught how to, we call it not planting, but building vineyards. This is the literally translation of Georgian word for establishing the vineyards. We build vineyards, we don't plant just vineyards. So building vineyards, setting up cellars, that means how to make a proper query, and stylistic winemaking. Why I'm saying stylistic winemaking? Because even in those years, when you see differences between the cellars and technical setup of the cellars, you immediately know that people understood their climate conditions perfectly, and they knew what was the quality of their grapes, and they designed the styles of wine in accordance to the grapes they harvested. But this is the topic of later conversations of ours. And then, of course, the joy of life, drinking wine from different vessels, as I said. In this part, we have huge fantasy, unlike our lack of fantasy to change the way of winemaking, which we kept for 8,000 years. Drinking is something ritualistic and something holistic in Georgia. And the way you drink, we say the way you live. So we observe the continuity of this life side from the sangot to the bowl. These are modern ways of setting up marani in Georgia. Of course, the core of producing grapes, bringing grapes, crushing grapes, vinifying grapes, and keeping wine into these jars, the core or this main part of winemaking has not changed even a bit throughout these centuries. But how we build now cellars in nowadays, of course, it's different thing from above. The vessels themselves remain of the same shape, from the same material, same sizes, according to where they are put in the ground, depending on the soil temperature, soil qualities, and other characteristics. But anything above, of course, has been going through modernization building materials were different and the availability was different. So this is a depiction of Marani, what we call in Georgian a cellar, how we build them. It is doable anywhere else in the world, and we have perfect examples in the United States when people brought queries from Georgia to United States. They are setting up something similar. I think the future will grant us an opportunity to set up a real replica, a real copy of Georgian Marani somewhere in the United States, and maybe this is going to be finger legs. Who knows? So let us see what happens. We should try to bring the birth and origins of wine to the United States for people who cannot visit Georgia, especially nowadays when rockets are going all around. Countries are burned down. This area. Why don't we bring the birth of wine culture to those who want to see it? The only difference will be place, but the rest will be exactly the same as we see it in Georgia.
And I'd like to add a couple of points here as well, that in a modern Georgian wine industry, we see tremendous enthusiasm from a young generation. We have sommeliers culture developing in Georgia and becoming fashionable with new generation, which is very, very encouraging. And another thing is also, we probably, but Lado, you know it better than me, have never seen so many women winemakers as it's happening right now and lately. And both of these things are very are diversifying further Georgian wine industry, and it's a great prospect for the future.
I think that is no surprise to our culture, because women have always been, at the top of the culture in this country. Even the fact that illumination of the country happened, in the 3rd century, and behind that was a 17 years old, lady, Nina. So we in our language we use such expressions like motherland, motherpila, to build the house around it. Mother language, we don't say just a language, when we speak to signify the meaning of our language, say mother language. So the way we led our life was like, we were this cultural enclave always, and we are at the crossroads from the north to the south, from the west to the east, and vice versa in any direction. So we've seen about 17 empires born and gone throughout our long history, but this tiny nation stands up still with its unique, unchanged, unbroken culture. And guess who is behind this? Of course, women, part of our population, our nation, our culture. When men were fighting, who was making wine? Who was taking care of grapes? Of course, that was perfect division of a role within the society. So everybody, it's not about men and women. We should not divide it in such strong way. It was a society with properly distributed roles, even for youngsters, for elderly, for stronger, for weaker. So this is the culture of wine. I'm not talking about only Georgian culture of wine, but in general, I think wine is the culture, I would say, which really brings everybody together and opens up mind in a different way. So we always had special diets, special wines for everybody. You could have wine for wedding, wine for birthday, wine for ladies' diet or men's diet. So this is something what somehow gives you the constituents of the culture, at the same time brings these constituents into one solid culture where everybody has its own role with no I would say strict dividing line between the members of the society. So yes, we see youngsters coming into this business. We see women, and women are, I think, percentage-wise, much more in Georgia, women winemakers, than anywhere else. And this is really, really great, I think. And they are quite, I mean, good tasters as well. They teach us a lot.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
It's very promising.
Yeah, I mean, it's a historically proven fact that this is the cultural dynamics. We don't see any surprise in it. We don't see anything new. It's been there. We even, in our history, we even called a queen, famous Queen Tamara, was called as King Tamara. So we just abolished all the lines between.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I think we are getting to the end of our first seminar, and I want to thank you, Lado, for.
Thank you both.
And thank you, Erika. I want to thank our viewers, and also please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another seminar before the festival. So we will see you soon. Thank you, Madlova.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for such a great idea.